Hello, and welcome to the fourth and final part of our Haddencott Tramway project. In this episode, I'm building the transfer area between the canal and the railway, which is where coal is imported onto the map and steel coils are exported off of the map. Then after that, we're building the town of Haddencott itself, or rather the outskirts of it, because even though the main line does continue on into the town centre, there is not enough space on this map to model that. So, if you're paying attention to what I'm building, you might already be thinking to yourself, is he really trying to fit all the facilities needed to load and unload barges into this little strip of land? The answer is yes. Well, half yes. Originally, I had intended to have everything in this little area and have the main line curved to the right so that there's enough space, but I really didn't like the looks of that. So instead I've decided to only have the cranes and things here and the sidings and turntable on the other side of the main line. Which does mean I'm going to have a way of getting across the main line. So either I could have another off-ramp, to borrow a road term, or I could have an underpass. Now, an underpass has several benefits. One, I don't have to foul the main line to get across every time, and two, it looks more interesting. So, it should come as little surprise that I've decided to go for an underpass. Now, you might also be thinking, is there actually enough space for all of this to fit in, and if there is, are the grades going to work? And we're just going to have to see. So here I'm using a locomotive to adjust the height so that the grade of the tracks is as shallow as possible. And that worked quite well, I think. Now, at this point, I've remembered that this crane asset only has one functioning track, even though it has two attachment tracks. So I've just put in a little invisible track on the other one that doesn't work to load, and there we go. That's it, all I need to do to avoid confusion about that. Now at this point, I've already begun working on the sidings and turntable bit. So I think at this point it's safe to assume that the underpass idea is actually going to work. And I've decided to put in a little station back here as well, just for good measure. Because I do quite like the idea of having passenger trains coming down the long, straight stretch of main line, which they would only do if there was a station down here. Plus it looks very nice. Oh yes, this bit with the roads. Because I'm connecting the roads to already existing spots and just basically connecting them up, it really did feel quite a lot like I was just playing Transport Fever 2. Also, you might have noticed that there is quite a lot of work for me to do if this is the final part of the series, and that this video is actually shorter than the others, bearing in mind that there is quite a bit of cinematics at the end. That is because most of the work is just filling in the map, like I'm just filling in a field here, only replace the field with the rest of the map, basically. So even though that's okay for a live stream where you can have nice and interesting conversations, for a video I've decided to cut most of that out. So here I've decided to spontaneously add a bit of forest, which I didn't originally intend to do, which is why those other brighter green trees were already on the side of the embankment of the main line. And I originally did intend to remove those trees, but then I looked at it and I actually did quite like the variety, so I left them in. Although I did delete some of the other trees so that they wouldn't intersect each other too much. Here I'm adding a row of poplars, and these trees are great on this map because they're tall, you can see them from across the map, and they look quite realistic. Plus I already added a row of them over by that little station, which actually gives it its name, which is Poplar Row. Right, now over to Haddencott. So as you may already be able to tell, the approach to Haddencott is elevated. And I decided to continue that elevation over a viaduct, which is actually going to go through the town. And this is actually quite typical of older railways in large cities or large towns where it's elevated like this. If you follow some of the lines in London, for example, you will find plenty of examples for this. So at this point, the viaduct spline that I'm using, I've discovered doesn't support seasonal textures, so I've had to put a seasonal spline of asphalt over it. Here I'm building the station, the main station on this line in Haddencott, and you might notice that this station is on the ground and my railway is not. So to avoid a very sharp grade, I've decided to also elevate my station. Yes, I'm joking, I had this planned from the very beginning, yes. And this is the bit of the main line that would continue on into the town centre were I to continue the map. But there are no plans for that at the moment. Here I'm putting in a little branch which goes down into the yard, and originally this branch was only supposed to go down into the rail yard where the roundhouse is and some sidings and things like that. But later on I did decide to add in a power plant, which I've actually already placed back there, you can see, which I actually hold on. What I've just drawn on there, I've just seen looks surprisingly like a creepy skeletal alien hand. That was not the intent, but luckily doesn't look like this in the final thing, so that's good. Anyway, yes, I actually had the idea of putting down a power plant in the first episode of this, but then I wasn't sure if I'm going to do it because it would add quite a bit of time towards how long this route takes to finish. But then in the end, I decided to put it in anyway because it gives the opportunity for street running, which is a good thing for a tramway. And actually thinking about it, that might actually be the original bit of this railway in universe, and that's still why it's called a tramway. Maybe it connected this industrial area, which is going to go over where the power plant is, to a river or to another main line that runs through the town or something like that. Who knows? Now here you can see I'm placing buildings, terrace splines along the streets, and you might think that that's quite a little amount of variation, and you'd be right, but that is by design, because when you're building a town that you are actually going to see a lot of, then you pretty much have to reuse the same assets over and over again, otherwise it would just take way too long to build. So a trick that you can use is to also use the same assets close up, so that have very little variety in the assets, because that way the player will still recognize this as the same pattern and will accept it as such, so that you won't realize that there's very little variety further away. Plus, in the case of towns in the UK, if it's an industrial town that was kind of built in the Victorian era, you do actually tend to get the same terrace house copy-pasted all over it, basically. So it is actually also quite realistic. And here you can see I'm putting in the... I was putting in the retaining walls because the interior of the station is actually going to be in that built-up area. Now here I'm building one of those sections of the town that is a bit further away from the tracks that you will be able to see, and as you can see I'm using the same terrace spline. And a few tricks if you're building something like this yourself. Here I'm putting down parallel splines so that if you're looking at it from further away, you could think that there are roads running between them because they are in parallel. And I've staggered them side to side so that you can't really look between them too much, which helps hide some of that empty grass area as well. Then after that, I am just putting in a little hill so that it's a bit more interesting to look at and not just flat as it would otherwise be. And then I'm just placing trees randomly between the sets of parallel houses. And then after that, I'm putting in very specific strategic trees to block specific corners or angles that I don't really want the player to look through. Next is placing down some very quick roads, which here I'm just aiming at areas of green that you can see. and trying to cover up some of those with roads, so that if you do look between the houses, you don't just see grass, you see a road. So that's what I'm doing. And then after that, I'm just tightening up some of the splines so that they actually go up to the roads. And so you don't see those quite obvious, big, unrealistic gaps. Yeah, and that's pretty much the pattern of how I built the further away areas of Haddencott. Now over to the industrial area, which only exists because I've decided to add that power plant. So I'm quite happy about that. And you also saw a little sneak peek of the road running section there, which you will see more of in the cinematics. Don't worry, don't worry. And yes, here I'm just putting in different factories and warehouses. And actually this factory building right there, I was really happy that I found it until I found out that it was apparently a packaged asset, which doesn't come with Trainz. So even though I had the no payware filter on, I had to replace it because it wouldn't work for a lot of people. And here I'm just putting down some moss textures because if asphalted areas are left alone, you don't tend to get that much grass on them, but you do tend to get quite a bit of moss. So I think that looks quite realistic and nice. Okay, here is a nice broad overview sneak peek of the industrial area and a lot more of Haddencott that I built on the left, and some more scenery back here where the transfer area is. And if you want to see more of it, you need to watch the cinematics or download the route, preferably both. Now the last thing I want to do in this video is place down signals, and that is a bit trickier with these signals than you might expect, because the UK semaphore signals, some of them, have a bug where it only detects the train approaching at about maybe 20 meters in front of the signal. So it'll show red aspect until you're right on top of it, and then it'll switch to actually be green or something like that. Which is, as you might expect, annoying. Now I was in contact with some other Trainz route creators about this earlier, and one of them, the author of the wonderful route Cornish Railways, which is on the DLS, Marky, told me that he puts invisible signals behind the semaphore signals, and that fixes the issue. And it does. Only in some cases it will show that the block is clear, whereas it really shouldn't be. So you do have to fiddle around with it to get it to work right. So with that, thank you very much for watching this video. This route will be uploaded to the DLS when it's finished. And if you want to support us, there are links in the description, and enjoy the cinematics.